You paid for me. Now do it, the defiant black woman commanded, her chains heavy but her voice unwavering as the weathered cowboy stood frozen, unprepared for such bold demands from someone he'd just bought at an illegal desert auction. The jeering crowd saw her as broken property, whispering she'd be dead within a month, another forgotten soul crushed by the unforgiving frontier. But the guilt-ridden rancher recognized her face from a past his family tried to bury, when his father's greed destroyed her bloodline for stolen land. Now she stood before him, not seeking rescue but demanding justice, while his unsuspecting schoolteacher wife waited at home, unaware that this single transaction would unearth decades of corruption that built their prosperity. The buried truth threatens to destroy everything he's built, but her return might be the only path to redemption. Will her demand for true freedom expose the sins that shattered her world, or will the reckoning bury them all? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift auction platform where Pearl Harris stood in iron shackles. Her dark skin glistened with sweat, but her spine remained straight. The crowd of rough men spat tobacco juice and made crude jokes about her future. $20 for the girl, called out a gravelly voice from the back. Pearl's eyes found the speaker, a tall man with weathered hands and guilt written across his weathered face. Ridge Coulter. She knew that name. She knew that face. The auctioneer banged his gavel. Sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. Ridge approached with heavy steps. The crowd dispersed, already forgetting her existence. He produced a key and knelt to unlock her shackles. The metal fell away with a dull clang. Pearl rubbed her wrists and fixed him with a steady gaze. You paid for me. Now do it. Do what? Ridge's voice cracked. Set me free. Completely. Ridge nodded slowly. He understood the weight behind her words. This wasn't about gratitude. This was about justice long overdue. The ride to his ranch passed in tense silence. Pearl studied the landscape with calculating eyes. This land looked familiar. Too familiar. Rolling hills and creek beds that matched memories from her childhood. Ridge's ranch house sat nestled in a valley surrounded by grazing cattle. A woman emerged from the front porch. She had kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Eleanor, this is Pearl, Ridge said carefully. Eleanor Coulter smiled warmly. You're welcome here for as long as you need. Pearl noticed how Eleanor's gaze lingered on her husband's troubled expression. She noticed other things too, the way Eleanor carried herself, the books visible through the window, the careful way she spoke. I appreciate the hospitality, Pearl said, but I'm not looking for charity. That evening, Pearl sat at the kitchen table examining documents Ridge had reluctantly provided. Land deeds, property transfers, and legal papers spread before her like pieces of a puzzle. These boundaries don't match what I remember, Pearl said, tracing a finger along a surveyor's map. Ridge shifted uncomfortably. Memory can play tricks after so many years. My memory is just fine. Pearl's tone carried steel. This section here belonged to my father, Samuel Harris. The color drained from Ridge's face. Eleanor looked between them with growing concern. That's impossible, Ridge whispered. Is it? Pearl reached into her worn dress and produced a folded paper. Original deed, signed and witnessed. My father made sure I could read every word before they burned our house down. Eleanor gasped. Ridge buried his head in his hands. Your father, Pearl continued, convinced Sheriff Dalton to declare our family dangerous, said we were planning an uprising. Complete lies. But it gave them legal cover to seize our property. I was just a boy, Ridge said weakly. Old enough to remember. Old enough to know right from wrong. A heavy knock rattled the front door. Ridge opened it to reveal Sheriff Dalton himself. The man's belly strained against his badge. His small eyes held cruel intelligence. Ridge, heard you picked up some cargo today. Dalton's gaze found Pearl. Best if that cargo keeps moving along. She's a guest in my home, Ridge said firmly. Guests don't usually come with papers and legal troubles. Dalton stepped closer. Some things are better left buried, son. Pearl rose from the table, papers still in hand. Sheriff Dalton, you remember me. The sheriff's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. I remember troublemakers. I remember thieves and liars. Dalton's face reddened. You'd best watch your tongue, girl. Accidents happen to folks who don't know their place. My place is on my family's land, the land you stole. Eleanor stepped between them. Sheriff, I think you should leave. Dalton laughed harshly. The schoolmarm's got opinions now, too. Careful, Eleanor. Your husband's got enough problems without you adding to them. After Dalton left, the three sat in heavy silence. Pearl organized her papers with methodical precision. What do you want? Ridge finally asked. What's mine? What you and your father took. What this whole town pretends never existed. Eleanor leaned forward. What can we do to help? Ridge stared at his wife in shock. Eleanor, you don't understand what you're saying. I understand perfectly. A family was wronged. Their property was stolen. The truth needs to come to light. Pearl studied Eleanor with new interest. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd protect what benefits her. Someone who'd choose comfort over justice. Eleanor smiled sadly. Sometimes justice and comfort can't coexist. Pearl made her decision. Instead of demanding immediate restitution or threatening exposure, she chose a different path. I want to stay. I want to work this ranch as a partner, not a hired hand. I want to prove this land belongs to my family. And I want to make sure no other families suffer what mine did. Ridge's mouth fell open. You want to stay here? With us? I want what's mine. But I'll earn it the right way. Through work, through evidence, through the law. Eleanor nodded approvingly. We'll help however we can. Pearl gathered her papers and stood. Tomorrow we start documenting everything. Every boundary marker, every property transfer, every lie that built this empire of stolen land. Ridge realized his simple act of buying Pearl's freedom had unleashed something far more dangerous than he'd imagined. She wasn't seeking rescue or revenge. She was seeking systematic justice, and she had the intelligence, determination, and legal knowledge to get it. The question that haunted them all as night fell was whether the truth would set them free or destroy everything they'd built on foundations of lies. Pearl woke before dawn and found Ridge already tending to the cattle. She approached with purpose, her father's leather satchel slung across her shoulder. We need to talk about boundaries, she said without preamble. Ridge looked up from the fence he was mending. What about them? Pearl unfolded a hand-drawn map. This is what my father sketched the night before they came for us. Every creek, every rock formation, every tree line. She pointed to specific landmarks visible in the distance. Ridge's fence post sat squarely on what had been Harris family grazing land. You're saying this entire section belongs to you? Belonged to my family. Will belong to my family again. Ridge set down his hammer. Pearl, even if that's true, you can't just claim property without legal process. Who says I can't? Pearl's eyes flashed. Your father didn't need legal process when he took it. Eleanor emerged from the house carrying a breakfast tray. She'd been listening from the doorway. What kind of legal process would you need? Eleanor asked. Pearl studied the school teacher with growing respect. Original survey records, witness testimonies, property tax payments, documentation proving continuous family ownership before the seizure. And if you had those things? Then I'd have grounds to challenge every fraudulent transfer that happened after 1869. Ridge felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. You're talking about dozens of property sales, half the ranches in this valley. I'm talking about justice. Eleanor set the tray on a fence post. The county records are kept at the courthouse, but some older documents are stored at the school. Pearl's attention sharpened. What kind of documents? Land grants, territorial surveys, marriage records, death certificates. The school doubles as a record repository for the district. You have access to those? Eleanor nodded. As head teacher, I maintain the historical archives. Ridge stared at his wife. Eleanor, you can't be serious about helping with this. Why not? If her claim is legitimate, she deserves justice. Pearl felt something unexpected. Hope. You'd risk your position to help me? I'd risk my position to do what's right. That afternoon, the three of them rode into town. Pearl kept her head high despite the stares and whispers that followed. Eleanor led them to the schoolhouse, a modest building that smelled of chalk and old paper. The archive room occupied the entire basement. Wooden filing cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with decades of territorial records. Survey documents would be in that section. Eleanor pointed to a corner cabinet. Property transfers in those drawers. Pearl dove into the files with systematic precision. Her fingers traced through documents with the skill of someone who'd been taught to read legal language. Here, Pearl pulled out a surveyor's report dated 1868. Official territorial survey, Harris family property clearly marked and registered. She found more documents. Tax payment records showing Samuel Harris current on all obligations. Testimony from neighbors confirming family residence and land use. Eleanor discovered something else. Pearl, look at this. A property transfer dated 3 days after the Harris house fire. Samuel Harris's signature transferring ownership to a territorial holding company. That's not my father's handwriting, Pearl said immediately. Eleanor compared the signature to other documents. It's completely different. Ridge examined the forgery with growing horror. If this signature is fake, then every subsequent sale was built on fraud. Pearl's hands trembled slightly as she held the evidence. They didn't just steal our land, they made it look legal. Who witnessed the signature? Eleanor asked. Pearl checked the document. Sheriff Dalton and Mayor Hutchins. Both still in office, Ridge muttered. Pearl carefully gathered the documents. This proves conspiracy to commit fraud. It proves my family was robbed under color of law. Eleanor found more evidence. Property transfers following identical patterns. Other families forced out under suspicious circumstances. Always the same witnesses. Always the same convenient timing. It wasn't just your family, Eleanor said quietly. They did this to at least 6 other families. Pearl felt the full scope of the corruption revealed. A systematic land grab. They identified successful families, manufactured legal pretenses, then seized property through fraudulent transfers. Ridge realized his father hadn't been an opportunist. He'd been part of an organized criminal conspiracy. What do we do with this information? He asked. Pearl looked up from the documents. We expose all of it. Every fraudulent transfer, every forged signature, every family that was robbed. That will destroy half the land ownership in this county, Eleanor warned. Good. It should be destroyed. It was built on lies. As they prepared to leave the schoolhouse, Sheriff Dalton appeared in the doorway. His bulk blocked their exit. Doing some research? His tone carried menace. Public records are open to everyone, Eleanor replied calmly, Dalton's eyes fixed on the papers in Pearl's hands. Some records are better left undisturbed. Why? What are you afraid we'll find? I'm not afraid of anything, girl, but you should be afraid of what happens to troublemakers. Pearl stepped forward. Are you threatening me, Sheriff? I'm giving you friendly advice. Pack up and leave town. Today. Ridge found his voice. She's not going anywhere. Dalton laughed. Ridge Coulter defending property that don't belong to him. Your daddy's rolling in his grave. My father was part of something terrible, but I don't have to continue his mistakes. You sure about that, son? Because mistakes can be expensive. Real expensive. After Dalton left, Pearl carefully secured the documents in her satchel. He's going to try to stop us, Eleanor observed. He's going to try, but I've got something he doesn't expect. What's that? Pearl smiled with quiet confidence. The truth, and the legal knowledge to use it properly. Ridge looked at the woman who'd transformed from victim to prosecutor in less than 24 hours. How do you know so much about property law? My father taught me. Every night after dinner he'd explain legal concepts. Said knowledge was the only thing they couldn't steal from me. Pearl had proven him right. They'd stolen her land, her family, her freedom, but they'd never stolen her mind. And now her mind was all she needed to take everything back. Word spread through Desert Valley like wildfire. Pearl Harris was back. She had documents. She wasn't leaving quietly. The general store owner refused to sell her supplies. The bank manager avoided eye contact when she entered. Mothers pulled their children closer when she walked past. Pearl felt their fear and used it. Fear meant they knew she was right. She spent mornings documenting property boundaries with surveying tools Eleanor borrowed from the school. Every fence post, every water source, every acre that once belonged to her family. Ridge watched her work with growing admiration. She moved across the land with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Her measurements were precise, her notes detailed and methodical. "You learned surveying from your father, too?" he asked. "Among other things. He said a person should know every inch of what belongs to them." Eleanor arrived with lunch and disturbing news. 3 families received eviction notices this morning. All families who talked to us yesterday. Pearl looked up from her compass. "Dalton's making examples. What can we do?" "Document everything. Every threat, every eviction, every act of intimidation. Build an airtight case." That evening, Mayor Hutchins visited the Coulter Ranch. He came alone but carried the weight of the town's establishment behind him. "Ridge, this situation has gone too far," Hutchins said without preamble. "What situation?" "You know exactly what situation. That woman is stirring up trouble that should stay buried." Pearl emerged from the house. "Mayor Hutchins, perfect timing. I have questions about your signature on certain property transfers." Hutchins's face reddened. "I don't answer to you. You will answer to a territorial judge, soon. No judge is coming here, girl, and you'd be smart to remember that." Eleanor stepped beside Pearl. "Actually, Mayor, a territorial judge has already been contacted." Both Ridge and Hutchins stared at Eleanor in shock. "What did you say?" Ridge whispered. "I wrote to Judge Morrison 3 days ago. Sent copies of all the fraudulent documents. He's opening an official investigation." Pearl felt a surge of respect for the quiet schoolteacher. Eleanor had been working behind the scenes more effectively than anyone realized. Hutchins backed toward his horse. "You people have no idea what you're messing with." "We're messing with thieves and liars," Pearl replied. "And we're going to expose every single one." After the mayor left, Ridge confronted his wife. "Eleanor, you contacted a territorial judge without telling us?" "I contacted him without telling you. Pearl and I discussed it yesterday." Ridge felt betrayed and impressed simultaneously. The women had formed an alliance that excluded him. "What else have you two planned?" Pearl smiled. "Tomorrow we visit the other families affected by the land fraud. We're building a coalition." "A coalition for what?" "Mass legal action. 1 family can be ignored. 7 families with documented evidence cannot." The next morning brought Sheriff Dalton and 2 deputies to the Coulter Ranch. They arrived armed and aggressive. "Pearl Harris, you're under arrest for trespassing and theft of public documents," Dalton announced. "On whose complaint?" Eleanor demanded. "Mayor Hutchins filed charges. Those school records belong to the county." Pearl remained calm. "Those records are public documents. I have every right to examine them. You have the right to keep your mouth shut and come with us." Ridge stepped between them. "She's not going anywhere without proper paperwork." "I got all the paperwork I need." Dalton produced handcuffs. Eleanor moved quickly. She disappeared into the house and returned with a leather portfolio. "Sheriff, I believe you should read this before making any arrests." Dalton snatched the document. His confident expression crumbled as he read. "Official notice of territorial investigation. Judge Morrison's seal. This ranch is under federal protection pending legal review." Pearl hadn't known about the federal protection either. Eleanor continued to surprise everyone with her strategic thinking. "That means," Eleanor continued, "any interference with witnesses or evidence constitutes federal obstruction of justice." Dalton's hand moved away from his gun. "This ain't over." "No, it's not," Pearl agreed. "It's just beginning." After the sheriff left, Pearl studied Eleanor with new eyes. Federal protection. How did you arrange that? My father taught me about legal procedures. Different kind of teaching than what your father provided, but equally useful. Ridge sensed undercurrents he didn't understand. Your father? Eleanor? Your father died when you were young. Eleanor's smile carried secrets. Did he? I don't recall saying that. Pearl caught the evasion immediately. Eleanor Coulter harbored mysteries of her own. That afternoon they visited the Martinez family, recent victims of a suspicious eviction. Maria Martinez wept as she showed them the forged documents that had cost them their home. Same handwriting, Pearl observed, comparing signatures. Same witnesses. Same pattern. The Williams family had lost their property 2 years earlier under identical circumstances. The Johnson family 3 years before that. Each visit revealed the scope of the conspiracy. Each family provided testimony and documentation. Each story followed the same corrupt blueprint. Pearl compiled everything into a comprehensive legal brief. Her father's training in property law guided every argument. Eleanor's research skills provided supporting evidence. Ridge's local knowledge filled in gaps. By evening, they possessed proof of systematic fraud spanning 5 years and involving dozens of properties. Tomorrow, we file formal complaints with the territorial court, Pearl announced. Ridge felt the weight of what they were attempting. Pearl, you understand this will destroy the current power structure. These people won't just give up. They should have thought about that before they became criminals. Eleanor added kindling to the fire. Judge Morrison arrives next week for preliminary hearings. Pearl looked at the woman who'd become her strongest ally. Eleanor, who exactly is your father? Someone who believes in justice, just like yours did. The evasive answer confirmed Pearl's suspicions. Eleanor Coulter possessed connections and knowledge that extended far beyond a small-town schoolteacher. But Pearl didn't care about mysteries. She cared about results, and results were finally within reach. The corrupt foundation of Desert Valley was about to crumble. Pearl intended to be there when it fell. Judge Morrison arrived on the morning stagecoach, with federal marshals flanking him. The entire town gathered to witness his entrance. Pearl watched from the Coulter porch, her legal documents organized and ready. The judge was younger than expected, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute authority. He established court in the town hall and immediately summoned all parties involved in the land disputes. Pearl entered the makeshift courtroom with Eleanor and Ridge behind her. The opposing side filled 2 entire rows. Mayor Hutchins, Sheriff Dalton, and a dozen property owners who'd benefited from the fraudulent transfers. This court is now in session, Judge Morrison announced. We're here to investigate allegations of systematic land fraud spanning multiple years. Pearl stood when called. Your Honor, I represent the Harris family and 6 other families whose properties were illegally seized through forged documents and false testimony. She presented her evidence methodically. Original deeds, forged signatures, tax records proving continuous family ownership, witness testimonies documenting the conspiracy. Judge Morrison examined each document carefully. Sheriff Dalton, these papers bear your signature as witness to multiple property transfers. Dalton shifted uncomfortably. I witnessed legitimate sales, Your Honor. Did you verify the identity of Samuel Harris when he allegedly signed this transfer? Of course I did. Pearl stepped forward. Your Honor, Samuel Harris was dead 3 days when that document was signed. I have his death certificate and burial record. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order. Eleanor rose from her seat. Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence. She approached the bench with a folder Pearl had never seen before. Complete federal investigation files documenting similar fraud patterns in 3 other territories. Pearl stared at Eleanor in shock. Where had those files come from? Judge Morrison reviewed the federal documents. Mrs. Coulter, how did you obtain these investigative reports? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Through proper federal channels, Your Honor. And what federal channels would those be? Eleanor took a deep breath. I'm Eleanor Morrison, Your Honor. Your daughter. The revelation hit the courtroom like lightning. Pearl felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of everything that had happened. Ridge gripped his chair, staring at his wife with complete bewilderment. "Eleanor, what are you saying?" Judge Morrison nodded grimly. Agent Morrison was assigned to investigate territorial corruption reports. She married into the Coulter family to gain access to local records and establish credible witness testimony. Pearl's mind raced through every interaction, every coincidence, every moment of unexpected support. Eleanor hadn't been helping from kindness. She'd been conducting a federal investigation. "You lied to me," Ridge whispered. Eleanor turned to face her husband. "I fell in love with you. That was never part of the assignment. But everything else was a lie. Not everything. My commitment to justice was real. My support for Pearl was genuine." Pearl studied Eleanor with a mixture of admiration and betrayal. "How long have you been watching me?" "Since we received reports of illegal auctions in this territory. We knew someone was challenging the land seizures. We needed local allies." Judge Morrison resumed control of the proceedings. "The personal relationships can be addressed later. Right now, we have evidence of federal crimes that require immediate action." Sheriff Dalton attempted to leave the courtroom. 2 federal marshals blocked his exit. "Sheriff, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and theft of federal property." Mayor Hutchins tried a different approach. "Your Honor, these allegations are based on old grievances and forged evidence planted by troublemakers." Pearl stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Mayor, would you like to explain how my father's signature appears on documents dated after his death?" "I don't have to explain anything to you." "You'll explain it to a federal prison warden." Judge Morrison addressed the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds systematic fraud in at least 12 property transfers. All affected properties are hereby placed under federal receivership, pending full restitution to original owners." The room exploded in protests. Property owners who'd purchased land in good faith suddenly faced losing their investments. Families who'd built homes on fraudulent foundations discovered their security was an illusion. Pearl felt no satisfaction in their distress. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Eleanor approached her during the recess. "Pearl, I know you feel betrayed. I feel manipulated, but I also feel grateful." "Grateful?" "You could have conducted your investigation without helping me. You chose to make my fight part of your mission." Eleanor's eyes softened. "Your fight was always the heart of the mission. The federal government can't fix local injustice without local courage." Ridge joined them, his expression torn between anger and confusion. "Eleanor, is our marriage real or part of your cover?" "Our marriage is real. My feelings are real. The assignment brought me here, but love made me stay." Pearl watched the couple struggle with truth and deception. She understood the complexity of Eleanor's position better than Ridge did. "She could have used you and discarded you," Pearl told Ridge. "Instead, she risked her career to fight for people she didn't have to care about." Judge Morrison reconvened court for sentencing. Sheriff Dalton received 5 years federal prison. Mayor Hutchins received 3 years in forfeiture of all property obtained through fraud. The other conspirators faced varying sentences based on their level of involvement. Pearl stood to address the court. "Your Honor, I request that families who purchased property in good faith be given opportunity to negotiate fair compensation with original owners rather than face immediate eviction. That's very generous considering what you've suffered. Justice shouldn't create new victims. It should heal old wounds." Judge Morrison nodded approvingly. "The court will establish a mediation process for voluntary property transfers and compensation agreements." As the proceedings concluded, Pearl realized her fight was entering a new phase. She'd proven her case and exposed the corruption. Now she had to build something better from the wreckage. Eleanor's deception had stung initially, but Pearl recognized the agent's genuine commitment to justice. Ridge's confusion was understandable, but his marriage could survive if both people chose truth over comfort. Pearl had reclaimed her family's legacy through law and evidence rather than violence and revenge. The foundation for real justice was finally in place. 3 weeks after Judge Morrison's verdict, Pearl stood on land that legally belonged to her family again. Federal surveyors had confirmed the original boundaries. The Harris property encompassed nearly 800 acres of prime grazing land. Ridge approached carrying a leather portfolio. The deed transfer is complete. Everything your father owned is restored to the Harris name. Pearl accepted the documents but didn't feel the satisfaction she'd expected. What about your family's ranch? We keep what we legitimately purchased, lose what was built on fraud. Ridge's voice carried acceptance rather than bitterness. Turns out my father actually owned less than half of what I thought we inherited. Eleanor emerged from the house they'd been sharing during the legal proceedings. The awkwardness between her and Ridge had softened into something resembling understanding. The Martinez family wants to meet this afternoon, Eleanor announced. They're ready to discuss compensation arrangements. Pearl nodded. 7 families had regained legal ownership of their stolen properties. But 3 of those families had decided to sell rather than fight to rebuild. The trauma of losing everything once made them reluctant to risk it again. Are you buying them out? Ridge asked. Partnering with them. They provide legal ownership. I provide capital and management. We split profits fairly. It was a practical solution that honored both justice and reality. Pearl had money saved from years of forced labor. She had knowledge of ranching and legal procedures. Most importantly, she had vision for building something sustainable. The Martinez family arrived that afternoon with their children. Maria Martinez had been crying, but her tears seemed hopeful rather than despairing. Miss Harris, we cannot thank you enough for what you've done, Maria said. You don't need to thank me. We helped each other. We want to accept your partnership offer, but we have conditions. Pearl respected people who negotiated from positions of restored dignity. What conditions? Our children work the land during school breaks. They learn ranching from you. When they're grown, they have option to buy back family ownership. Agreed. Anything else? We want other families to have the same opportunities. Make this a model for how justice should work. Pearl felt the scope of her mission expanding. You're talking about more than just ranching. You're talking about changing how this whole region operates. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. Eleanor had been listening quietly. I've been offered a permanent position as Territorial Education Coordinator. I could help establish schools that teach real history instead of convenient lies. Ridge looked at his wife with surprise. You're staying? If you want me to stay. If you can forgive the deception about my identity. I'm learning to separate what you did from who you are. Pearl observed their reconciliation with interest. Truth had damaged their relationship, but hadn't destroyed it. They were building something more honest from the wreckage of convenient illusions. Judge Morrison visited the ranch before returning to territorial headquarters. He surveyed the bustling activity with approval. You've accomplished something remarkable here, he told Pearl. We've accomplished something necessary. Remarkable would be if it hadn't taken federal intervention to get basic justice. Fair point. What are your plans moving forward? Pearl gestured toward the expanded operation. Build the largest cattle operation in the territory. Hire families who've been displaced by corruption. Prove that legitimate business succeeds better than criminal enterprise. And if the remaining corrupt officials try to interfere? They won't. I have documentation of every shady deal in this county. Anyone who causes problems will find their own secrets exposed. Judge Morrison smiled. You've learned to use power effectively. I've learned to use truth effectively. Power is just the natural result. That evening, Pearl walked the boundary lines of her restored property. The sunset painted the grasslands golden. Cattle grazed peacefully in pastures that had once been stolen from her family. Ridge found her by the creek where she'd played as a child. Regrets? About what? Not taking revenge when you had the chance. Dalton and Hutchins deserved worse than prison. Pearl considered the question seriously. Revenge would have made me feel better for a moment. Justice makes entire communities feel safer forever. You sound like your father. I hope so. He believed in building things that last. Eleanor approached, carrying a lantern. The Johnson family accepted the partnership terms. That makes 5 families in the cooperative. Pearl felt satisfaction in the growing alliance. How many total families were affected by the fraud? 12 that we've documented. 3 chose to sell and move away. 4 are joining the cooperative. The others are rebuilding independently. And the families who purchased property in good faith? Most negotiated compensation agreements. A few chose to stay and work as ranch hands rather than lose their investments completely. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was practical justice. Pearl had learned the difference between idealistic revenge and sustainable change. Ridge cleared his throat. Pearl, I need to say something. She waited patiently. I'm sorry. For what my father did. For what I failed to stop. For the years you suffered because of my family's choices. Ridge, you were a child when this started. I was old enough to know right from wrong when I became an adult. I chose comfort over conscience for too many years. Pearl studied his face in the lamplight. What are you choosing now? Justice, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it costs me. Then we're partners in the truest sense. The 3 of them stood together in the gathering darkness. An unlikely alliance forged by truth, strengthened by shared purpose, and committed to building something better from the ashes of corruption. Pearl had reclaimed her family's land through intelligence and legal precision, but more importantly, she'd established a model for how justice could work when people chose courage over comfort. The real test would be sustaining this progress over time. But Pearl felt confident in the foundation they'd built. Truth, once revealed, had a way of protecting itself. 6 months later, Pearl stood before the largest cattle herd in Desert Valley's history. 3,000 head of prime beef stretched across restored Harris family pastures. The cooperative had grown from 5 families to 12, transforming the entire region's approach to ranching. Ridge rode up on horseback, dust coating his hat and shirt. Eastern buyers confirmed their offer. $15 a head for the entire herd, Pearl calculated quickly. $45,000, split among 12 families according to their partnership agreements. More money than this valley has seen from legitimate business in 20 years. Eleanor approached from the new schoolhouse, a building twice the size of the original. Her students followed behind, ranging in age from 6 to 16. The school now served children from all the cooperative families. History lesson concluded successfully, Eleanor announced with satisfaction. Every child now knows the real story of how their land was stolen and reclaimed. Pearl watched the children scatter toward their homes. What do they think about it? They're proud. They understand that their families fought for justice and won through intelligence rather than violence. The new sheriff arrived on schedule for his weekly report. Tom Bradley was everything Dalton hadn't been: honest, competent, and committed to equal enforcement of law for all citizens. No incidents this week, Bradley reported. The remaining troublemakers seem to have gotten the message that corruption isn't tolerated anymore. Pearl nodded approvingly. What about the territorial capital? Any news on the broader investigation? Judge Morrison's final report documented similar fraud patterns in 6 other counties. Federal oversight is being extended throughout the territory. Ridge smiled grimly. Justice spreads like wildfire once it gets started. Pearl had discovered that truth about systemic change. One successful challenge to corruption encouraged others to demand accountability. Their victory had inspired similar legal actions across the territory. The Martinez children ran up breathlessly. Miss Pearl, the new foals are walking. Mama wants you to see them. Pearl followed the children to the breeding paddock where Maria Martinez waited with obvious excitement. 3 healthy foals wobbled beside their mothers, representing the future of the cooperative's horse breeding program. Beautiful stock, Pearl observed. Your breeding program is exceeding expectations. This is just the beginning. Next year we'll have enough horses to supply the entire territorial mail service. Eleanor joined them at the fence. The Territorial Education Department wants to document our cooperative model. They're considering it as a template for post-conflict reconstruction in other regions. Pearl felt the weight of unintended influence. We just wanted our land back. You did more than that. You proved that justice and prosperity can coexist when people choose cooperation over exploitation. That evening, Pearl walked alone to the hill where her family was buried. Simple wooden crosses marked their graves, carved with care by Ridge's own hands. She'd added her father's pocket watch to his marker, finally letting go of the last tangible connection to her stolen childhood. "We did it, Papa," she whispered. "Not the way you might have planned, but we got our land back. We got our dignity back." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around the graves. Pearl felt peace rather than grief for the first time since the night her family died. Ridge and Eleanor found her there as darkness approached. Their own relationship had stabilized into something deeper than their original attraction. Truth had wounded them, but ultimately strengthened their bond. "The cattle buyers want to establish a permanent purchasing agreement," Ridge reported. "They're willing to pay premium prices for beef from the cooperative." "Why premium prices?" Eleanor smiled. "Apparently, ethical business practices are becoming fashionable in Eastern markets. Buyers want products from operations that treat workers fairly and operate with transparent accounting." Pearl laughed at the irony. Honesty as a marketing advantage. Revolutionary concept in this territory. They walked back toward the ranch house together, comfortable in shared silence. The building had been expanded to accommodate meetings of the cooperative's governing council, democracy in action at the local level. Judge Morrison had sent a final letter commending their work and noting its influence on territorial policy. The Desert Valley model was being studied by federal administrators interested in post-war reconstruction strategies. Pearl hadn't set out to become a symbol of anything larger than personal justice, but symbols chose themselves based on the courage to act when action was required. A young woman approached the house leading a tired horse. Pearl recognized her as Sarah Williams, daughter of one of the families who'd chosen to sell rather than rebuild. "Miss Harris, I need to speak with you," Sarah said urgently. "What's wrong?" "My family wants to come back. We sold our land rights because we were scared, but we've been watching what you built here. We want to be part of it." Pearl considered the request carefully. "The land has already been redistributed among the cooperative families. We're not asking for land back. We're asking for jobs, for the chance to earn partnership over time." Eleanor stepped forward. "We could use more teachers and administrators as the cooperative expands." Ridge nodded agreement. Experienced ranch hands are always valuable. Pearl made her decision. "You're welcome to join as employees with pathways to partnership based on contribution and commitment." Sarah's relief was visible. "Thank you. We learned that running away from problems doesn't solve them." "No, it doesn't, but facing them with allies makes them manageable." As the months passed, the Desert Valley Cooperative became a model of how communities could heal from systematic injustice. Property rights were respected. Workers were treated fairly. Profits were shared according to contribution. Children learned accurate history alongside practical skills. Pearl had achieved everything she'd demanded that first day when she commanded Ridge to honor his purchase by truly freeing her. But freedom, she'd discovered, wasn't something you received. It was something you built through intelligence, courage, and strategic alliance with people who shared your commitment to justice. The woman who'd stood in chains now stood as proof that dignity couldn't be bought, stolen, or given. It could only be claimed by those brave enough to demand what belonged to them by right. And Pearl Harris had claimed everything.